Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with D.C., New York City-based jazz bassist Luke Stewart. We caught up with him to talk about his latest CD, his career in jazz, and the future that everything is now opening up for live jazz. Originally from Mississippi, he has performed at many important venues in D.C., New York City, and around the world. As a scholar and performer, he has performed and lectured at Harvard University, Johns Hopkins University, Medgar Evers College, and the University of South Carolina, along with others. He's got a great story. Enjoy.
Hey, Luke, thanks for taking a minute after the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and dive right in here. And you have new material out. It's coming out during a global pandemic. Talk to me a little bit about the timing and what it's like to get new material out to fans.
For the recordings that were released in 2020, a number of them were recorded before the pandemic, and a number of them were recorded during the pandemic, so to speak. So there's a mix of things. First of all, a mix of things that were scheduled to come out in 2020 that were already in the works, and then also things that were indeed recorded in 2020. In terms of releasing music, I feel like from the practical sense, after performances and concerts are canceled, which obviously myself and an entire industry had cancellations. So the alternative for that as a musician is to release music, shift focus more so onto releasing records from that practical sense. And then just from the, artistic and spiritual sense, really finding the affirmation in this time by the existence of the passion to continue to create and to find, in a lot of ways, during that time period, a really crucial and much needed change of pace and also change of focus that allows for reconnection to that original passion for art, for the music, and seeing the fruits of that in the material that's being released during a time when most people are locked in.
So talk to me a little bit about, once we reemerge and things are starting to kind of open up right now, how do you believe maybe you and the world of jazz will emerge stronger from what we've gone through with all of this?
Well, that remains yet to be seen. I get the sense, first of all, that people are very, very excited to get back to whatever it is their perception of normality is, but also getting the sense that a lot of things that were happening before the pandemic, in terms of the way certain structures within the music industry, the music community at large, a lot of things can't continue during this time. We've had a year to be closed and obviously a lot of reflection and re-examination of how things have happened in society overall. And I feel like for the jazz community in particular, it'll be interesting to see how those re-examinations and those reckonings, so to speak, will play out in the next few months as things really start to open back up.
So let's go back to your roots. Talk to me a little bit about your childhood, where you were born and raised, and how jazz became your life.
I grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast in a town called Ocean Springs, Mississippi. My first instrument that I took seriously was the saxophone. I played that in the marching band and in the wind ensemble when I was in middle and high school. I was also playing the bass guitar with my friends in punk bands and other sort of weirdo experimental-ish kind of bands. I was also engaged in DJ/turntablism/production sort of explorations, electronic and hip hop oriented. And I think the combination of all of those things led me to the exploration of the idiom of jazz once I was able to really interact with a living jazz community once I moved to Washington, D.C. Growing up, being raised in Mississippi, and what I say is that I was raised in Mississippi and I grew up in D.C. since I've been in D.C. for a long time, and now existing in both New York City and in Washington, D.C. My involvement in jazz as a musician happened when I moved to D.C. and was able to, for the first time, interact with a living jazz community.
Talk about New York. What was it like to get kind of into that scene and kind of get things moving in a forward direction?
The first time that I really saw, I'll say, bebop sort of jazz, because I had gone to the New Orleans Jazz Festival a few times growing up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, it being the closest major city, experiencing some semblance of the music community in New Orleans, just as an audience member. But the jazz that I was exposed to in New Orleans at the time wasn't the thing that I was necessarily listening to on myself, checking out on records. The jazz that I was checking out was more in line with what was happening in Washington, D.C. at the time. And so the first time that I was able to see a concert that I felt connected with was my first time going to a jazz club in Washington, D.C., which was Twins Jazz, and I went to go see Sonny Fortune, and he was performing a lot of his earlier works. I remember it pretty clearly. He played some of his earlier, swinging, so to speak, songs. It was a revelation. It was a real awakening. That moment, that particular moment, and from there, it really just went into more focus and study on the instrument. At the time, it was still saxophone and bass guitar. I hadn't yet had the opportunity to play the upright bass, but once that happened, once I did have the opportunity to start playing the upright bass, that was when I feel like I reached another level of involvement in terms of I went to exactly a couple of jam sessions on the saxophone, but once I started playing the upright bass, it for some reason made me feel more comfortable, and I was able to interact with that living jazz community as a musician a lot more, and slowly but organically develop my musicianship and my relationship with the community in DC through the music, as well as, I should mention, being on the radio at WPSW 89.3 FM, station for jazz and justice, which is a decades long existing radio station out of Washington, D.C. that I worked for a number of years. And I just started having a show again on there as well. But my interactions with and relationships with the number of people at that radio station also helped develop, I think, very rapidly and exponentially, my music listening IQ, so to speak. The things that I was able to be exposed to at that period of time as a young musician really just expanding my listening vocabulary and thus expanding my understanding and my musical and historical understanding of the development of the music.
What do you like the best about being a professional musician?
Being a professional musician is different for everyone who is a professional musician. But for me, it is a sense of freedom that I have in my in the marriage, so to speak, of my livelihood and my passion, for better and for worse. I like the fact that I get to focus on my artistry and my creativity and use that as a means of connecting with the world. I would say that's my favorite part about it.
So let's say you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger self around the time that you were becoming a professional, and you could give your younger self one piece of advice based on what you learned throughout all these years. What would it be?
If I could time travel back to my younger self, at which point in my life?
Just if you have a dream and like right around the time you started becoming a professional.
I don't know. To be honest, I would say maybe, I practiced a lot, but I would mean practice more. I don't know. I think that overall, despite a lot of things that I've seen as shortcomings or, missed opportunities or unavailable opportunities, so to speak, I think, especially as I get older and continue on the journey, I've come to appreciate every stage, and I've really come to also appreciate the relatively unique nature of my journey, even though, again, I've in the past felt shortcomings about it, but it's come around to become an asset in terms of the perception of what the journey is, or even the fact that it is a journey. And I've come to appreciate every stage and see how it's been key to my development and to where I am now. And I hope that the things that I'm doing now will continue to propel that journey into the future.
So as we get closer and closer to kind of the full force live environment, what do you hope we all realize or understand about this long time away from live music?
Well, a number of things. First of all, I would say that we need to respect music and musicians more in the sense of trying to understand and be more empathetic about the plight and condition of what it is to be a musician in 2021, and also understand that plight is infinitely vast and diverse. There are a lot of different places and conditions where professional musicians are coming from. And while we are a very specific and unique group, we're by no means a monolith. And we by no means have the same path and the same journey, and we don't have all the same needs as well, or same desires. So having a greater understanding of that and a greater appreciation in terms of why it is that we listen to music, why it is that we appreciate and find that music and live music in particular is important, and why it's important to support that. And furthermore, why it's important for a lot of the structural issues to become the concern of the audience as more of these conversations about economic structures, about racial structures, gender roles, all of these things that have been in the conversation. As the understanding is greater, becomes greater through these conversations, hopefully that understanding is applied to creating more economic equity, creating more equity and opportunity, creating more equity and control for the artists over the structures of economics in the industry of music and also in the industry of the nonprofit arts industry.
Everyone has an idea, a perception of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but you're ultimately living your life. Who do you think you are?
My name is Luke Stewart, and I'm a musician and an artist and a spiritual journey person, and a lover and a fighter. I love long walks on the beach, and I love watching documentaries, and I love having great conversations. That's who I am.
Perfect. I love that answer, man. Luke, thank you for taking some time out for Neon Jazz. Good luck with the album and the return to the stage, man.
Right on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, D.C., Mississippi, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Luke for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.